Okay, so this month we're going to be doing some sewing. We're going to be making this pen pouch that also can be used as a bookmark. You can move it to wherever you want your notebook or your book to open, put it around the front cover and those pages, and then it'll act as a bookmark. And that is what we're going to sew this month. Now, there'll be instructions on how to sew it from scratch in the description, but what you're going to get is a project that's pretty much almost done, just has a few seams left, and it's going to look something like this. And you can either sew those last few seams with a sewing machine or by hand. These are the seams we're going to be sewing. We're going to sew French seams, which you'll see what that is in a minute, but they're going to be right along there. If you're using a sewing machine, you're going to want to backstitch at the beginning of the seam, backstitch over the zipper teeth, and then backstitch at the end of the seam. I'm going to be showing you how to hand sew in case you don't have a sewing machine or don't want to use your sewing machine. So you're also going to get this little sewing kit that has a needle and some thread and a needle threader. Now, the way the needle threader works is it has a little teeny tiny hook on the end of it. It's got this little hook. Now you're going to think that you want the hook to go up, but you actually want the hook to go down when you go and put it in the needle. You want the hook facing down so the needle can slide along the top of the hook and not get caught. So once you've got the needle on the needle threader, then you're going to grab your thread with the hook and tilt the needle threader down so the needle slides off the needle threader and onto the thread. And that is how the needle threader works. Now I'm going to take both ends of this thread and I'm going to tie them. I'm going to line them up and then I'm going to tie them in an overhand knot. And that is how I'm going to knot my thread. It's just one little overhand knot with the two ends, right? Get this out of the way. And then the seam line is marked with a line right there, and we're just going to follow that line and do a running stitch, which we learned in our embroidery back in January. So I'm going to come up on the line and then back down on the line a little further along, make a stitch. And then to secure it, I'm going to go and tuck the needle in between the two threads that are tied together and then pull, and that is going to make it nice and sturdy. It's not going to come out. So I'm going to keep doing a running stitch along that line. A running stitch, you just make a stitch, leave a little space, make another stitch, leave a little space, and I'm just going to do that all along the line until we get to the zipper teeth. In the middle there'll be some zipper teeth. Now if you're using your sewing machine, the sewing machine will sew right through those zipper teeth, no problem. You'll just want to backstitch over them to make sure they're nice and secure. The zipper teeth aren't going to come apart. But when you're sewing with a needle and you get to the zipper teeth, you're not going to be able to go through them with this sewing needle. So I'm going to get there. It's going to take me a minute to get to where the zipper teeth are. And when I do, I'm going to have to poke around to find the other side of the zipper teeth. So I get one edge of the zipper teeth. And now I just need to poke down until I find the other end of the zipper teeth, other edge. And I'm going to end up making a big stitch that goes around the zipper teeth. So you see how that stitch is bigger than my other stitches. And I'm just going to make that stitch 2 or 3 times. Just keep going around the zipper teeth 2 or 3 times just to reinforce it, just to make sure zipper teeth aren't going to come away from each other. And they're going to stay nice and close to each other. And then I'm just going to finish with a running stitch all the way to the end of my seam. Almost there. Okay, so now once I get to the end, I'm just going to start coming back the other way. So I went one way and now I'm going to come back the other way. And when I'm coming back the other way, I'm just filling in between the stitches I made going the one way. So everywhere there's a space between stitches, I'm just putting another stitch in that space. And again, when I get to the zipper teeth, I'm going to need to go around them because this needle is not going to go through them. Now, I probably should have said at the beginning, this is a French seam, and that is why what we're looking at right now is the right side of the fabric, the right side of the project. And we're sewing on the right side first, which is not usually what you do when you sew a seam, but with a French seam, you sew wrong sides together, right sides out first, then you turn it inside out and sew it wrong sides together, well, right sides together, wrong side out, and that seals the original seam. So there's no raw edges. You'll see when we get there, but anyway, this is wrong sides together, right side out that we're sewing to begin with. And we're almost done. Headed in the home stretch of this seam. And when we get to the end, we're going to go around to the back and find that those threads, the tail that we had to begin with. And we're going to just tie those two together in an overhand knot. 2 or 3 times. 2 is fine, but at least 2. But you can also do 3 if you want it extra secure knot. I'm going to do 3, just because I like the number 3. Then we're going to cut those threads pretty short. And they're going to get hidden in the French seam, so we don't have to worry about hiding them. Because when we turn this the other way around, well, when we turn it inside out and do the other seam, they'll get hidden. So now we're going to do the same thing to this other end. So we're sealing up both ends. Now once you've got both seams done, it's time to trim the seams. And we want an 1/8 of an inch seam. It was a 1/4 inch to begin with. So we're going to cut it down to an 1/8 of an inch, so about half the size. And then we're also going to bevel the corners. So we're going to cut at an angle at the corners, close to the stitches, but be careful not to get too close to the stitches and cut into the stitches. But yeah, we're going to do that to both ends. So this side we're also going to cut to an 1/8 of an inch. So about half the size the seam was. And then bevel the corners. Cut them at an angle there. And now we are ready to turn it wrong side out. Because right now it's right side out. We need to turn it wrong side out and finish off our French seams. So, open it up and turn it wrong side out. And we want to make sure we poke those corners out really good. Get nice sharp corners. That's part of why we beveled the corners, was so there wouldn't be bulk at the corners and they would make a nice sharp corner. So I'm going to get this old chopstick here. I'm just going to poke around until I get my corners all nice and poked out, nice and sharp. Sometimes it helps to zip up the zipper a little bit when you're poking out the corners. Alright, so we've got the corners all nice and poked out. And now we want to sew the final part of the French seam, which is going to seal in those raw edges from the original seam. So I've got a little seam gauge here. It's got a 1/2 inch seam on one side, 1/4 inch on the other. I want a 1/4 inch seam, so I'm going to use the smaller 1/4 inch side. I'll line that up with my edge there. I'm going to grab a marker, and just in each of those holes I'm going to make a little dot next to the 1/4 inch side of my seam gauge here. And that is going to make me a nice little seam line that I can sew another seam down. And so I'm just going to hand sew that seam just like we sewed the original seam, and then I'm going to hide my ends there in the little French seam area. So where the other raw edges are hidden, I'm also going to hide my threads from this seam. So I'm just going to, when I'm done sewing the seam, done making my knot, I'm just going to tuck that needle right in there and then snip it off. And I'm going to do the same thing with the other threads that are hanging out. I'm just going to get those onto my needle using my needle threader. And then I am going to poke that needle into the French seam where the other raw ends and everything are hidden. And I'm going to hide that end and then snip it off. This way, when you put your pen in there, you're not going to run into any raw edges that might fray. You're not going to get tangled up in any loose threads. It's all going to be nice and neat and tidy inside your pen pouch. And that is the beauty of a French seam, is that there aren't raw edges fraying. You got a place to hide your thread ends. Happy, happy. Okay, snip off that thread. Now we're going to do the same thing to the other end that we just did to this end. So now both ends are done. And all we have to do now is turn it right side out, poke the corners out, and we are good to go. It'll be ready to use. So I'm just going to turn it right side out, and then once I get it turned kind of right side out, I'm going to grab that chopstick again and poke those corners out nice and sharp. Yep, nice and sharp. And then I just got to zip it up. Well, I'll poke this corner out a little bit more. Zip it up, and it is done. Voila!